Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. I'm your host, Tom DeAmber. As always, we're very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. My friends, I hate using the word anniversary because anniversary is usually a joyous, happy event, but recently was the calendar anniversary of one of the biggest inside jobs ever perpetrated against the American people. It obviously has changed our lives. It has affected the lives of millions of people throughout the world, for that matter, including numerous wars. Loss of rights, higher taxes, militarized police, on and on and on and on. But please take notice that I did say inside job. And I know a lot of times, myself included, believe me, my friends, I was born and raised in a red, white, and blue household. My father was an extremely well-decorated combat veteran of the Korean War. He was in 5 major campaigns. My father sacrificed tremendously for this country, and also my mother with her ancestry. So it's tough to understand that government is a tool now, and has been for quite some time, of the international bankers, the elite, the people who control all these central banks. Anytime you hear the word central bank, European Central Bank, Federal Reserve, Central Bank, whatever, anytime you hear that, understand is that that is a private for-profit banking corporation. And as Amschel Rothschild said, if you give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws, because if you control the currency, you control everything about that government, including not just the legislators, all the corruption and everything else, but literally it's easy, folks. Let me put it to you this way. If you're an insolvent corporation and I'm the banker / creditor, who are you going to be answering to? The stockholders / voters, or the creditor that's keeping your insolvent corporation afloat? Obviously, the creditor. So this is what I say when I say to you that we are not in control of the government. Now, Trump has had some major effects with regards to controlling some of the immediate strings of the government, but he hasn't got control of probably 80% of it. Use, for example, the Justice Department. Trump does not have control of the Justice Department. So what we've got to understand is that we're not in control. And when we elect people, we think we're electing them. They're basically appointed. My friends, I read a report this past week that Hillary Clinton, this is legit now, this is real. I'm not going to get into it too much because I got so much to cover here, but Hillary Clinton stole, or the Democratic DNC, through their means, 17 million votes from this past election in 2016. 17 million. Now, this is all for real, folks, but I'm not going to get into too much. But see, we're not in control. And government has been weaponized against not just the American people, but the people of the world, for that matter, because the world has gotten smaller through the advancements of technology. So it's tough to believe that our government, when it's not our government, is what I'm telling you, it is the government of the international bankers, orchestrate crises against supposedly its own people. Now, this brings us back to the Hegelian dialectic about crisis, reaction, solution. Create a crisis, get the emotional response you want from the people, and bring in the solution, and the solution always benefits the people who created the crisis. And it's always detrimental to the people who allowed their rights to be taken away, or they sent their sons and daughters off to war, because of that crisis that was created by the people who are going to receive the benefit. Key bono. Who is always benefiting from these events? Always have to ask that. So, before we do a quick thing of 9/11, let's see if there's anywhere else in history where other governments and or our government in correlation or collusion, I should say, with the other governments have ever orchestrated other terrorist events to bring on events that affected millions of lives. So, this comes from the Burning Platform. And it's a wonderful site, my friends. Anyway, I'm just going to say this right here. Headline here is, Presidents, Prime Ministers, Congressmen, Generals, spooks, soldiers, and police admit to false flag terror. Scores of government officials throughout the world have admitted, either orally, in writing, or through photographs or videos, to carry out or at least seriously proposing false flag attacks. Okay, now, when you get into false flags attacks, my friends, there's a couple of things you've got to understand. The pretenses are this. You either let it happen or you make it happen. Are you with me? In other words, you may know through your intelligence that a certain group that you may be financing, but let's just this is the let it happen. You may be financing it, but you may not be, whatever, but you are aware through intelligence that this particular group is going to carry out an attack on fill in the blank. The World Trade Center, Pearl Harbor, Gulf of Tonkin, USS Max, whatever. Okay? So you let that attack happen. You're aware of it, and you let it happen. Pearl Harbor is a great example of this. We had cracked the Japanese Purple Code literally 6 months prior to the Japanese waging a war by attacking Pearl Harbor. We knew the two fleets that were leaving Hiroshima and Tokyo Bay. We knew the rendezvous points, and we had a time within 72 hours when they were going to attack. Now, once we were certain that they were going to attack, and you have to ask yourself, why did a little island nation of Japan decide to take on, as Yoshimoto said, the sleeping giant? Well, it was because Harry Hopkins had an 8-point plan to make Japan, quote unquote, fire the first shot. And this plan was all sanctions. We put the Japanese into a corner and made them, through sanctions and economic conquest, attack us. But we were aware of it. When I say we, I mean the United States government, all the way up to FDR. FDR gave the order to move Battleship Row from California, San Diego, California, to Hawaii. And them ships and all the personnel on it were cannon fodder because they needed the numbers. I know this is hard to accept, my friends. This is historical truth. So, you see, Roosevelt let it happen. They knew when the Japanese were coming. Folks, they even took a battleship, the USS Utah, because they wanted the Japanese, they wanted Yoshimoto to believe that the aircraft carriers were in harbor. Well, they weren't. The two aircraft carriers were out west of Pearl Harbor, southeast of Pearl Harbor, doing circles out here, while the Japanese came in from the northwest. But you see, the Navy had understood that the future of naval warfare was going to be aircraft carriers. Yoshimoto may not have attacked Pearl Harbor if it wasn't for the ruse of the USS Utah, which was a battleship, having a flat top put on it so the Japanese would think it was an aircraft carrier. That's how deep it goes, my friends. They let it happen. They set up the duck decoys for the ducks to come in, but they let it happen. Poll after poll after poll, before December 7th, nobody wanted to go to war. On Monday morning, when the recruiting offices opened up, there was millions of able-bodied men of all ages ready and willing to go to war. They let that happen. Like I said, they set up the duck decoys for the ducks to come in, but they let it happen. Then you have things like 9/11. Because at 9/11, this was an inside job. It was orchestrated. You had the WTC of 93, where the FBI hired a retired Egyptian colonel to blow up the pylons of the World Trade Center, North Tower, I believe it was. And what they did, though, was the Egyptian colonel thought this was a drill. They were being told, he was being told with his people that this was a drill. And when they gave him live munitions, he went up to the FBI and said, wait a minute, this stuff's real. I'm not, this isn't part of it. This isn't a drill. The FBI went through that anyway. That was in the New York Times. But they didn't get the result they wanted because the buildings were so strong, they didn't get the collapse. Hence 9/11, they made sure they got the collapse, and they got their big crises to present to the American people so that the very next day, millions of people would line up at recruiting offices to go to war. So, is there any other history of this? Let's be real quick. Japanese troops set off an explosion on a train track in 1931 and blamed it on China in order to justify an invasion of Manchuria. And folks, this incident is known as the Mukden, M-U-K-D-E-N incident. The Tokyo International Military Tribunal found that several of the participators in the plan, including Hashimoto, is a high-ranking Japanese army officer, have on various occasions admitted their part in the plot and have stated that the objective of the incident was to afford an excuse for the occupation of Manchuria by the Kuomintang Army. Provide the excuse. A major in the Nazi SS admitted that in the Nuremberg trials that under the orders from the chief of the Gestapo, he and some other Nazi operators faked several attacks on their own people and resources which they blamed on the Poles to justify the invasion of Poland. Now, folks, what they're talking about here is and we've gone over these before, the German radio station in Gleichwitz, which was right on the Polish-German border, the strategic railway at Janonkov Pass, which is located on the border between Poland and Czechoslovakia. They also blew up the German customs stations at Hochtelin, the service station in Pixten, the communications station in Nürnberg, and the railroad station in Altich, and a woman and her companion in Kaltwitz. The details of the Gleichwitz radio station include a night of 31 August 1939, a small group of German operatives dressed in Polish uniforms and led by Nazis by the Gleichwitz station and broadcast a short anti-German message in the Polish. Sources vary on the content of the message. And the Germans' goal was to make the attack and the broadcast look like the work of anti-German Polish saboteurs. To make the attack seem more convincing, the Germans used human corpses to pass them off as Polish attackers. They murdered Franz Honkik, a 43-year-old unmarried German Sicilian Catholic farmer known for sympathizing with the Poles. He had been arrested the previous day by the Gestapo. He was dressed to look like a saboteur and then killed by lethal injection, given gunshot wounds, and left dead at the scene so that he appeared to have been killed while attacking the station. His corpse was subsequently presented to the police and press as proof of the attack. Okay. Now, I'm gonna sort of go on from that a little bit, folks. Nazi General Franz Holder also testified at the Nuremberg trials that the Nazi leader, Hermann Goering, admitted to setting fire to the German Parliament building in 1933 and then falsely blaming the communists for the arson. You know that as the Reichstag. That's right. The Reichstag building. The Germans burned their own parliament building, blamed it on the communists, implemented these actions that gave Hitler a new position that they created through this crisis known as the Führer. And the German people went right along with it. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev admitted in writing that the Soviet Union's Red Army shelled the Russian village of Menia in 1939 while blaming the attack on Finland as a basis for launching the Winter War against Finland. Russian President Boris Yeltsin agreed that Russia had been the aggressor in the Winter War. Does that not remind you what happened in Georgia, where the Russian troops had to come in and ixnay our people that we had put into Georgia? I don't mean the state of Georgia, my friends. I mean the country of Georgia. The Russian parliament, current Russian President Putin, and former leader Gorbachev all admitted that Soviet leader Joseph Stalin ordered his secret police to execute 22,000 Polish army officers and civilians in 1940 and then falsely blamed it on the Nazis. The British government admits between 1946 and 48 it bombed 5 ships carrying Jews who were Holocaust survivors attempting to flee to safety in Palestine right after World War II, set up a fake group called Defenders of Arab Palestine, and then had the pseudo-group falsely claim responsibility for the bombings. What do you think of that? They bombed 5 ships of Holocaust survivors. Talk about cannon fodder. Israel admits that in 1954, an Israeli terrorist cell group operating in Egypt planted bombs in several buildings, including U.S. diplomatic facilities, and left behind evidence implementing the Arabs as the culprits. The U.S. Army does not believe that this is an isolated incident. For example, the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies of the Mossad, and the Mossad is the Israeli intelligence service, says they're ruthless and cunning, has capability to target U.S. forces and make it look like a Palestinian Arab attack. Can you say the USS Liberty, where we attacked our own naval ship? Let us go on. As former Prime Minister Moshe Dayan administered in his diary, I have been mediated on a long chain. Listen to this. I have been meditating on the long chain of false incidents and hostilities that we have invented, and on many of the clashes we have provoked, which cost us so much blood. An official of CIA history admits that in 1954, the CIA contractors flew planes painted with Guatemalan Air Force insignia and then bombed targets in Guatemala. In addition, radio messages about troop movements had been pre-recorded at a CIA base in Florida. That would be Indian Air Force Base. That's where they do a lot of this out of Florida for everything in Central or South America. This led to the overthrow of the Guatemalan government. The CIA admits that it hired Iranians in the 1950s to pose as communists and stage bombings in Iran in order to turn the country against its democratically elected prime minister. And who did we put in 1958? Guy named Saddam Hussein. The Turkish prime minister admitted that Turkish government carried out the 1955 bombing on a Turkish consulate in Greece, also damaging the nearby birthplace of the founder of the modern Turkey, and blamed it on Greece for the purpose of inciting and justifying anti-Greek violence. Starting in the 1950s, Turkey's deep state sponsored killings, engineered riots, colluded with drug traffickers, and staged false flags attacks and organized massacres of trade unionists. Thousands died in the chaos it fomented. The British Prime Minister admitted to his defense secretary that he and American President Dwight Eisenhower approved a plan in 1957 to carry out attacks in Syria and blame it on the Syrian government as the way to effect regime change. The former Italian Prime Minister, an Italian judge, and the former head of the Italian counterintelligence admitted that NATO, with the help of the Pentagon and the CIA, carried out terrorist bombings in Italy and other European countries in the 1950s through the 1980s. That's 30 years. 30 years of bombings, and blamed the communists in order to rally people's support for their governments in Europe and then in their fight against communism. First of all, who logistically supported and financed every communist movement in this world? The international bankers. Now, this operation that I just got talking about, my friends, is called Operation Gladio. Look it up. You'll be shocked at what you'll read. One participant in this formerly secret program stated, "You had to attack civilians, people, women, children, innocent people, unknown people, far removed from any political game. The reason was quite simple. They were supposed to force these people, the Italian public, to turn to the state to ask for greater security so that a state of emergency could be declared so people would willingly trade part of their freedom for their security." Ben Franklin. Those who give up liberty for a little security deserve and will get neither. Benjamin Franklin. He also said that perception is reality. Let us go on. I'm running out of time, my friends, so listen, some other false flag attacks that carried out pursuant to this Operation Gladio. The murder of Turkish Prime Minister in 1960, the bombings in Portugal in 66, the Piazza Fontana massacre in Italy in 69, the series of terrorist attacks in Turkey in 71, the Pitiano bombing in Italy in 72, the shootings in Brescia, Italy, and a bombing on the Italian train in 74, shootings in Istanbul, Turkey in 77, the Atacha massacre in Madrid, Spain in 77, the abduction and murder of the Italian Prime Minister in 78, and the bombings of Begonia railway station in 1980. That's just to name a few that were listed in this. In 1960, American Senator George Smathers suggested that the U.S. launch a false attack on the Guantanamo Bay, which would give us the excuse of actually fomenting a fight, which would then give us the excuse to go in and overthrow Castro. Can you say the Northwoods document? We have read this document to you verbatim. Official State Department documents show that in 1961, the head of the Joint Chiefs and other high levels discussed blowing up the consulate in the Dominican Republic in order to justify an invasion of that country. As admitted by the U.S. government, recently declassified documents show that in 1962, the American Joint Chiefs of Staff signed off on a plan to blow up American airplanes, commit terrorist attacks on American soil, and then blame it on the Cubans in order to justify an invasion of Cuba. Okay, folks, this brings us to Operation Northwoods. And I'm not going to, for the sake of time, read all this, but basically, my friends, they were going to use MiG-type aircraft by U.S. pilots, provide additional provocation, harassment, Silver Air Patrol, attacks on surface shipping, and destruction of U.S. military aircraft by MiG-type planes, which would be useful as complementary actions. An F-86, I believe the F-86 was the Sabre, I believe, properly painted would convince air passengers that they saw a Cuban MiG, especially if the pilot of the transport were to announce such facts. The primary drawback of the suggestion appears to be the security risk inherent in obtaining and modifying the aircraft. They had no problem doing it, folks. It would have been where the CIA does a lot of their operations, like I said, for the Caribbean, Central America, South America, Elgin Air Force Base in Florida. Okay, it also gets into the aircraft registration belonging to the CIA propriety organization, how they were going to use that. Okay, so folks, I'm not going to get into all that. They actually get into how they provocated using 4 or 5 F-101 aircraft that were launched from Homestead Air Force Base in Florida to the vicinity of Cuba to antagonize the Cuban Air Force. They didn't have any success. Okay, a declassified 1973 document reveals a program to train foreign police and troops on American soil how to make booby traps, pretending that they were training on them to how to investigate terrorist attacks. The agency maintains liaison in varying degrees with foreign police organizations and through its stations. Now, That brings us to the School of the Americas, where they have always, since the 60s, since the LBJ administration, taught foreign entities how to commit terrorist attacks, and they have been used here on American soil. Okay? Now, let's go on, folks, real quick. The Mossad agent admits that in 1984, Mossad planted a radio transmitter in Gaddafi's compound in Tripoli, Libya, which broadcast fake anti-terrorist transmissions recorded by the Mossad in order to frame Gaddafi as a terrorist supporter. Ronald Reagan then bombed Libya. Let's see, the German government admitted in 1978 the German Secret Service detonated a bomb in the outer wall of a prison and planted escape tools on a prisoner, a member of the Red Army faction, which Secret Service wished to frame for the bombing. The South African Truth and Reconciliation Council filed that in 1989. The Civil Corporation Bureau branch of the South African Defense Force approached an explosives expert and asked him to participate in an operation aimed at discrediting the African National Congress by bombing the police of the police vehicle of the investigating officer into a murdering incident. The Algerian diplomat and several officers of the Algerian army admitted that in the 1990s, the Algerian army frequently massacred Algerian civilians and then blamed Islamic militants for the killings. 93, a bomb in Northern Ireland killed 9 civilians. Official documents from the Royal Ulster Constabulary of the British government show that the mastermind of the bombing was a British agent and that the bombing was designed to inflame sectarian tensions. United States Army 1994 publication, Special Forces, Foreign Internal Defense, Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures for Special Forces, employing terrorists and using false flag operations to destabilize regimes in Latin America. False flag terrorist attacks were carried out in Latin America and other regions as part of the CIA's Dirty Wars program. Similarly, a CIA Psychological Operations Manual prepared by the CIA contractor for the Nicaraguan Contra rebels noted the value of assassinating someone on your own side to create a martyr for the cause. The manual was authenticated by the U.S. government. The manual received so much publicity from the Associated Press, Washington Post, and other news coverage that during the 1984 presidential debate, President Reagan was confronted with the following question on national TV. I'm not going to get into all that, my folks. This is when they were operating with the Sandinistas, okay? Okay, I'm going to be real quick here. A couple of quick ones. Official German intelligence services documents from 1994 that the German intelligence services planted plutonium on an airplane coming in from Russia as a way to frame Russia for exporting dangerous radioactive materials which could end up in the hands of terrorists and criminals. This frame-up job was so successful at whipping up fear that it got German Chancellor Kohl reelected, and the U.S. used it as an excuse to help secure Russia's nuclear facilities as a way to get access to Russian nuclear secrets. And by the way, folks, the American people paid hundreds of millions of dollars for that. Okay, so I've been real quick here. Let me see, I've gone through 12 pages and I've got another 14 to go. I don't have the time for it. I think you get the idea. The government is weaponized against people when every government that I just mentioned to you here, every single one, had a relationship with either the CIA, the Mossad, MI6 and 5. That's just 4 agencies that are fomenting all of these false flags throughout the world. Throughout the world. Now, some of these predate the MI5 and 6 and the CIA and so forth. Well, we had the OSS. So understand, folks, that government, when it is not controlled by the people and not held accountable to the people, is weaponized against the people. And we had an event called 9/11. Isn't that just ironic that it happened to be on 9/11? And what happened to the 50th anniversary of the Pentagon that was the event, big celebratory event that was supposed to take place on 9/11 at the Pentagon, that was canceled in July. Why did they cancel it? Because they obviously knew this event was coming on 9/11. So now, let us listen to an interview from now current President Trump, who has a tremendous amount of expertise about buildings and putting buildings, or what is in the buildings and what makes a building structurally sound. And he has the top engineers in the world who build buildings for his corporations throughout the world. He has knowledge from the top, the creme de creme, if you would, in the engineering world. So now, let's listen to then future President Trump the day after September 11th, 2001.
Great.
Donald, you're probably the best known builder, particularly of great buildings in the city. There's a great deal of question about whether or not the damage and the ultimate destruction of the buildings was caused by the airplanes, by architectural defect, or possibly by bombs or aftershocks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was an architectural defect. You know, the World Trade Center was always known as a very, very strong building. Don't forget, that took a big bomb in the basement. Now, the basement is the most vulnerable place because that's your foundation, and it withstood that. And I got to see that area about 3 or 4 days after it took place because one of my structural engineers actually took me for a tour because he did the building. And I said, I can't believe it. The building was standing solid, and half of the columns were blown out. I mean, so this was an unbelievably powerful building. If you know anything about structure, it was one of the first buildings that was built from the outside. The steel, the reason the World Trade Center had such narrow windows is that in between all the windows, you had the steel on the outside. So you had the steel on the outside of the building. That's why when I first looked, and you had big, heavy I-beams, when I first looked at it, I couldn't believe it because there was a hole in the steel. And this is steel that was, you remember the width of the windows in the World Trade Center, folks. I think you know, if you were ever up there, they were quite narrow. And in between was this heavy steel. I said, how could a plane, even a 767 or 747 or whatever it might have been, how could it possibly go through the steel? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. Most buildings are built with the steel is on the inside around the elevator shaft. This one was built from the outside, which is the strongest structure you can have, and it was almost just like a can of soup.
You know, Donald, we were looking at pictures all morning long of that plane coming into building number 2, and when you see that approach the far side, and then all of a sudden, within a matter of a millisecond, the explosion pops out the other side.
Right. I just think that it was a plane with more than just fuel. I think, obviously, they were very big planes. They were going very rapidly, because I was also watching where the plane seemed to be not only going fast, it seemed to be coming down into the building. So it was getting the speed from going downhill, so to speak. It just seemed to me that to do that kind of destruction is even more than a big plane, because you're talking about taking out steel, the heaviest caliber steel that was used on a building. I mean, these buildings were rock solid. And, you know, it's just an amazing thing. This country is different today, and it's going to be different than it ever was for many years to come.
Very profound statement and very true.
Okay, so folks, that was Donald J. Trump smelling a rat the day after 9/11. And not on suspicion, but on knowledge. That's what makes him so dangerous, my friends. is one, he can't be bought. He's not part of the elite's clique, as so many have told us in the past. And that's why they're on him so hard. And you can see the control of the bankers. Every aspect of society, the media, academia, within the government, outside the government, everything that's controlled by the bankers is attacking President Trump and or his people. So I still had 14 pages of incidents to go through, of false flags that have been waged against the American people and people throughout the world. Folks, think of the consequence of 9/11. Wars, taxes, bloodshed. But let's look at it in a perspective of that Hegelian dialectic that we speak of so often. Crisis, reaction, solution. Again, triangle. You create the crisis, you get the emotional response you want from the people, and as George Hegel said, you have to have fear in that equation, and if you can put a little bit of anger in that recipe and stir it in that bowl, even better. And then that brings us down to the final part of the triangle, which was the goal all along, to bring in the solution that strengthens the position of the people who created the chaos at the detriment to the people who responded through emotion and not knowledge. Let's look at some quotes in history. This is Samuel Clemens. You know him as Mark Twain. It is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. Why? Well, maybe ego has something in that equation there, which works for the benefit of the people who are creating the crisis, aren't they? Because if your ego does not allow you to look at something objectively after you've already made a decision and made an action upon that previous decision, then there can be no remedy, can there? And there will be no further investigation into that event because my mind's made up. I'm staying in this box. I won't get outside my box. This was written by Hunter S. Thompson after 9/11. If I'd written all the truth that I knew for the past 10 years, about 600 people, including me, would be rotting in prison cells from Rio to Seattle today. Absolute truth is a very rare and dangerous commodity in the context of professional journalism. Now, where, especially at that period of 2001, because the internet was really just coming into itself, was the average American getting their information from? CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS? I would gather to say probably 75 to 80% of Americans in 2001 were getting their information from that. And the rest of them were getting indoctrinated from academia. So what did a person who made a career out of journalism and was the editor of a very prestigious, high circulated newspaper in New York say about journalism here in America? This is from John Swinton. I know the caption says 1880. That's when he started his career. This is actually his retirement gala in 1924. And mind you, 1924 is the year that J.P. Morgan and like really took over the print media here in the United States. And think about 1924, my friends. Radio was just coming in and print was it. Okay? The business of journalists is to destroy the truth, to lie outright, to pervert, to vilify, to fawn at the feet of Mammon, and to sell his country and his race for his daily bread. We are the tools and vassals of rich men behind the scenes. We are the jumping jacks. They pull the strings and we dance. Our talents, our possibilities, and our lives are all the property of other men. We are intellectual prostitutes. That from a man from 1924 at his retirement gala who was in editing for 40 plus years. He saw the takeover, my friends. It really started, believe it or not, in the late 1800s. That's how they got us to go into the Spanish-American War with the false flag, the USS Maine. Then the rallying call was, remember the Maine. They got us into World War I with the Lusitania. While the Germans actually, and we had this before on the screen for you and other shows, actually broadcast a warning in all the New York papers, which is where the Lusitania left from, saying it's a munition ship, they're setting you up, do not travel on it. They got us into World War II, but with a pretense of Pearl Harbor, like we just discussed. They got us into Korea with, what was the Chinese general? That's in Douglas MacArthur's autobiography. The Chinese general who put his troops into the theater said, I would have never committed my troops into the Korean Peninsula theater if I had not had assurances from Washington. My father, as I said earlier, was a very decorated Korean combat veteran. He saw brutal combat. Brutal. And he never spoke of it. But when I graduated from Paris Island, the only time he spoke about Korea, the first thing he said to me was, they always knew what we were going to be doing. Well, of course they did, because the Chinese general was getting MacArthur's plans from Washington. And what is the media in 1924? What do you think they are today? They are nothing more, my friends, than intellectual prostitutes, according to John Swinton. This is Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf. The best way to take control over a people and control them utterly is to take a little of their freedom at a time, to erode rights by 1,000 tiny and almost imperceptible reductions. In this way, the people will not see those rights and freedoms being removed until past the point at which these changes cannot be reversed. I will tell you, my friends, the final layer on this cake was going to take place when Hillary Clinton was placed into the presidency. That was going to be the final layer of the cake. And that's why they committed all this fraud and collusion and corruption, because they had the system rigged. They were absolutely 100% sure that she was going to be elected. They almost pulled it off, friends. 17 million votes is a lot of votes, isn't it? Let us look at some other quotes from Adolf Hitler. Make the lie big. Make it simple. Keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. Weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction. Oh, ain't no weapons under here. Nope, none over here. I speak of two events, don't I? The event of the propagandize of weapons of mass destruction to get you to send your sons and daughters to Iraq, and they're still there. Of course, most of the Democratic-controlled cities have a higher casualty rate than Afghanistan and Iraq put together every weekend. Another form of warfare against the American people by another setup, pre-planned occupation of a demographic of people. Make the lie big. Make it simple. Keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. Weapons of mass destruction. The Russian collusion, the Russian collusion, Trump, Russian collusion, Trump, Russian collusion. $30 million investigation. Trump, Russian collusion. Do you get it? Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they are acting on their own free will. You see, folks, it ain't with the barrel of the gun no more. It's you will willingly and graciously give up your freedoms and your rights for the benefits that they will provide to you, including the false hope of security. You see it? And look what's happened since 9/11. We got the Department of Homeland Security. You go ahead and try traveling. You like getting prodded? Go to an airport. They'll prod you, and you will enjoy it. You will enjoy your servitude, as Mr. Huxley presents to us. You will enjoy your servitude. You see, because you will be made to believe that you are acting on your own free will, when the whole time you've got a whole set of Judas priests that are in religion, that are in academia, that are in government, that are in NGOs, that are in your own network of friends and family, that will take you down the slaughter gates into the slaughterhouse. And we pay for all of it. From the indoctrination centers that are separating the families and the parents and dumbing down the children. What was it, our document that we just got done going over? Right? The technical research operators document. What did it say? That they will dumb down the masses. They will not teach them real mathematics, real law, real history, real science. Well, they've done it, haven't they? They wanted to get the reading level to a 6th grade reading level. Well, folks, any newspaper editor will tell you that we're at a 4th grade reading level for every high school graduate as compared to a high school graduate from 1964. 4th grade reading level. What took place in 1964? The feds took over education in our federalized districts. And you may know it as the state of fill in the blank. Folks, the state of fill in the blank operates as a district. And the federal government can be involved in what? District, enclaves, and territories. Please, we've presented this to you before. Go on the internet and punch in district of fill in the state. I don't care what state. We're from Vermont. Punch in district of Vermont. It'll come up. This is how the federal government, through the wordsmiths that you know as attorneys, attorn to separate one from one's property, got into the states. This is how they approach it. This is how they've encroached our rights by keeping us ignorant. One without knowledge. I'm not saying we're stupid. I'm saying we are ignorant as a people. We don't read our founding documents. We don't know our own history. We don't know we bond our children. We don't know Senate Document 43, which all properties is subordinate to the necessities of the states. And all the states are is insolvent corporations answering to another insolvent corporation, answering to its creditors. Do you get it? So in these false flags like 9/11, and folks, you know, let's talk some more about 9/11. This is a woman from the BBC, and if Bill, if we could blow this up, my friend, for the big screen. Thank you, brother. This here, my friends, in the background is WTC 7. Now, this building collapsed in its own footprint a little after 1600. That's 4 p.m. in the afternoon. That's right. Most Americans don't even know this. No, this plane was not hit by a jet. This plane had 2 small room and content fires. but this building, this building had 2 small room and content fires, nothing that would even think about structurally damaging this building. But yet, a little after 4 p.m., it fell completely down on itself and its own footprint. Now, this woman from the BBC was reporting this 20 minutes before the event took place. They mistimed their broadcast. Do you get it? They not only knew it was going to happen, my friends, they goofed up for everybody to see because the building is still standing right behind her, although she is reporting that that building had collapsed due to damage of fires. Do you get it? And the leaseholder of the WTC complex, which he signed on in June, doubled the insurance on it in July. Interesting, huh? And Mr. Larry Silverstein, what did he have to say about this Building 7? He said, I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. That's bull dung. If you read the fire department stuff and listen to the radio transmissions, they were reporting small room and content fires. Let us continue. And I said, you know, we've had such a terrible loss of life. Oh, now he cares about life. And maybe the smartest thing to do is to pull it. And they made that decision to pull it, and then we watched the building collapse. My friends, pull it is a demolition term to blow it up, to bring it down on its own footprint. You do not make a phone call in the time and make a decision and then go into a building that's ablaze and set up all the demolitions to admittingly pull the building on its own footprint. You can't do it. Physically impossible. Physically impossible. But Larry Silverstein's admitting it. And he made out very well, didn't he? From Key Bono. Did Larry Silverstein benefit from 9/11? Well, let me see. If you consider $4 billion enough of a payout to benefit from, then I guess he did quite well, didn't he? Did you, your sons or your daughters benefit from this event? Not at all. Not at all. And we could get into so many things, and we've covered 9/11, my friends. We've covered it from stem to stern, and the science doesn't back it up, and video, so many things that weren't investigated. It was a complete inside job, false flag. It wasn't meant to just let it happen. It was made to happen. As I said in the beginning of this program, they do it 2 ways. They can let the event happen, or they can make it happen. And this one, my friends, they made it happen. This was a false flag attack waged against the American people that has changed the demographics of not only our nation, but the world for that matter. And it was carried out by the rogue elements of the United States government. And from a lot of reports, the Mossad was highly involved with this. And who benefited? Who benefited? Did the international bankers benefit? Did the U.S. military benefit? Did the corporations benefit? Everybody benefited except for the American people who the co-surety to the debt and do the bleeding for the profit of the corporations. Everyone benefited except for you and I and our like. All based on lies. George Collins. Here's the bumper sticker I'd like to see. We're the proud parents of a child who has resisted the teacher's attempts to break his spirit and bend him to the will of his corporate masters. Don't let them bend your will, my friends. You gain knowledge. Go out and discover truth, I'm telling you. You want to get excited about life? You go out and find out the games that are being perpetrated against us as a people and what road they want to take us down to, because there is an amazing battle going on right now for the future of our nation. Take part of it. My friends, we're very thankful you took the time from your busy day to view our program. We always close asking you to seek truth, to obtain knowledge, manifest kindness to your fellow man, and we always close on reminding you that your government is your responsibility, and we thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. line.